what if it's actually too small? What if it's actually so much more transformational than I ever thought in the first place?
Can we go higher? Can we go higher?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to Just What I Needed. So today, twist, I am interviewing Paul. It's just going to be
What? That
us
sounds
here
amazing.
today. We might have a pop-up guest. We might not. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm going to be interviewing him today. And today we're going to talk about defeat. And why we're bringing this up today, very personal. Many of you have been following our journey. Some of us haven't. But we have this really cool technology that helps unlock human potential, more particularly your own potential, and runs with AI, and it's really cool and matches opportunities. Anyways, we see it. The vision's good. But it's brutal out there. A lot of rejections. Just had 2 big ones yesterday, some that I really wanted. So I wanted to have this conversation with Paul in the live. Like, what do we do when we're in this moment? Yeah. So Paul, I'm going to hand it to you because I definitely, one of these days where I wanted to retreat. I want to be like, maybe this dream is too big.
I get that. So I am very thankful to be here because I know we've had some really cool guests and I'm really glad to be among the really cool guests. So this is awesome. I think that we all have a tendency. Well, let me start differently. As many of you know, I am an economist by training, and that colors a lot of my perspective and the ways that I see the world and the ways that I see problems and see solutions. And so in economics, one of the things that I think is so profound and transformational and exciting and yet so little talked about. Like Esther, I don't think you had ever heard of this until I started talking about it, right? Is this idea of big universe and small universe. It is so powerful. And it starts out actually very mathematical in a lot of ways. It starts out very technical, theoretical, where we're looking at optimizing, right? If you've taken ever an economics class in your life, you've talked about finding the optimum, right? What is the best place? What's the best solution? But what's true in life, in the universe, and certainly in mathematics and economics is that the size of the problem matters, right? The context within which you're optimizing matters. So if you are looking at something that is pretty small, pretty self-contained, the optimization problem looks pretty small. And we do this because the smaller we can make the optimization problem mathematically, the easier it is to solve, right? So the bigger we make the problem, the more complex it is. And so we tend to want to not go into big universe sometimes, mathematically and in life and in the universe, because the bigger we make the problem, the bigger we make the solution have to be. But one of the things that we lose when we stay small universe in our optimization is that we lose the possibility of solutions that we haven't even seen. Solutions that we haven't even thought about, solutions that we don't look at because they're not in our immediate view. So the whole idea is getting to the big universe, because as soon as you go big universe, you sort of go big picture, you look beyond, and what you start to see is that what people's reality so often is just a series of small universes, and there are solutions out there that we haven't even thought about. There's perspectives out there that we haven't even thought about. So when we start thinking about when it is that we are winning, when it is that we are struggling, when it is that we're feeling defeat, as Esther said, and this is real. This is, as she said, this is the situation that we are literally in right now. We know we have, in fact, the way that I frame it, I know that this product that we have is amazing. Because why? Because it looks at the big universe. It's a big universe solution that we're trying to bring in, and we're pitching it and we're selling it. And what we're seeing is that it's hard. It's a really tough world. It's a really hard place to try to get people to see your big universe or your concept of it, right? So it's easy to start to feel defeated. You start to think about, well, maybe the small universe is where I belong. Maybe this idea isn't a big universe solution in the first place, right? And so I can definitely understand. All of us feel that way sometimes, right? We know, Esther and I know, we have a lot of close friends and acquaintances right now that are in a bad place because they're putting themselves out there and they're not necessarily getting the hits that they want, you know? So I would say a couple of things just to sort of start thinking about this idea of defeat. I think one of them is that if we're thinking about defeat and we know that we're trying to push out into the big universe, when we're seeing defeat, we have to see it compartmentalized. Like that defeat has occurred within this small universe, within this small space. And so the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is, was this the right version of the small universe to be putting it forward? Where else can we start to publicize, to think about, to not even just advertise, but to really bring awareness of the big universe solution that we're bringing into different spaces? So I think that's one thing. You have to sort of think about how it is that what you're bringing, what you're doing, how does that solution start to move people's awareness into the big universe? Because I'll tell you one thing that is super, super important. Once you see a bigger universe, you cannot unsee it. And that is really, really key, because the more that you start to expand your worldview, the more that you start to expand the size of the impact that you believe that you can have, it never shrinks. It doesn't shrink. You just see more and more opportunities. And what you start to realize is that even that larger perspective that you've had, even that bigger universe, it's still a small universe. There's always something bigger out there. So even when you start to feel defeated, there's a space and a place for you to think about, where am I not doing this? Where else could this grow into? Maybe this was just the wrong slice of the universe to be pushing this in, and I need to find where else it goes.
So what would you say to someone, including myself? Why does defeat make our universe smaller? Like, why does it automatically, you're like so pumped up, and I mean, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. Like I'm so
Yeah.
pumped up with the vision and the legacy. And then all of a sudden you get a rejection or two. And then you immediately start questioning yourself, shrinking the idea and the universe. Like why does defeat make our universe smaller?
I'll tell you exactly why. And this again goes back to economics. And it comes down to basically risk and safety. So one of the things that happens is, and we see this economically all the time. For example, as soon as the economy starts to go into a recession, people immediately feel scared. They worry about their financial safety. And if they worry about their financial safety, they worry about their physical safety and the safety of their families and all of that. The very first thing that happens is that people no longer take a long run view. They start to shrink their planning horizons closer and closer and closer to them, because they want to keep things close to their chest, right? Within the sphere that they can control, right? And the same thing happens to us when we start to push boundaries, when we start to trailblaze, right? As soon as we start to move forward into a bigger universe, into a larger space than where we necessarily feel comfortable or where we necessarily know that we have won before, as soon as that hit comes, you retreat into safety. And so that's what that feeling of defeat is. You feel yourself literally shrinking your perspective and trying to come back down into this place back where I feel safe, right? And so that safety is really, really, that feeling of safety is really key, right? And so I think part of the growth that comes from doing these things over and over again is realizing that you don't have to do that in order to feel safe. right? There's different ways of feeling safe that don't necessarily require you to come all the way down, or at least not for very long. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that we should be inhuman robots and feel impervious to the things that life smacks you around with. But it's about how do we keep moving forward? How do we keep our mentality open and our mindset open? And so much of it is doing anything that you can that keeps you in that larger mindset, right? And only because I know you're going to ask me, well, give me some specific examples of that. Esther hates it when I speak too vaguely. So I can tell you, for example, one of the things that helps me personally is, and I know we've talked about it on the show before, is breathwork, right? This is one of the things that breathwork is for, because the ultimate big universe is sort of that whole spiritual energy that at a certain point in your life, if you've asked the right questions and if you've sat with them enough, you realize that there's such a deep connection between all of us and something bigger, right? So that helps me. I achieve that by, if I need to sit and I need to breathe for a while, very consciously reminding myself that I am not only part of that gigantic, immense, infinite universe, but that I'm actually an important part of it, right? And I think that's one part. The second part is much more tangible. It is thinking about who, and in my case, who is it in my life that helps me stay in that big universe. So we've talked several times about, for example, the difference between your supporters and your champions, right? Who is it that's sitting at your round table? Esther uses all the time the analogy of who is in your audience and who is in the front row, right? Your front row people need to be the ones that help you stay in that big universe perspective, right? So in those moments of defeat, you need to have people that you reach out to, right? And then about you very specifically, knowing what it is that helps you in that moment, right? There are some folks that the safety is important to them, that physical safety, that emotional safety, and creating that space that allows them then to bounce back and go up into the big universe. And there are other folks like myself. For me, the most important thing is growth. Knowing that I'm not remaining static, that I'm not just drowning in this. What do I need to do? What do I need to learn? What do I need to improve that maybe I know a little, but a little bit more would really give me that boost, right? The whole point is to not remain static and drowning in it.
I mean, that's a good segue into thinking about, because what happens to me too is then I start thinking, is this idea wrong? Or am I in the wrong universe, right? I'm in the smaller pig. And when I was thinking about our product, I think one of the things that we haven't touched on is when you become defeated too, you even shrink in your vision of what you're creating, right? And you're talking about the safety. I feel like that's what happened a little bit with the product. Is like I kind of went into, well, these are the features I can control right now and what I can do. And then we lost sight of like the really cool thing, the matching, right? And so what would you say then, it's like to someone else in that situation of how do they know whether the idea is wrong or they're simply in the small universe? Or for example, like, do they need to change the vision or just change the route? Or have they explored enough to the big universe to call this defeat? Or, how do they navigate that? I've been there too. Do I need to change the solution? Do I need to expand the universe in which I'm looking for the solution?
That's a great question. I would say a couple things. I think for one, the more you say it, the more I feel a visceral reaction against the word defeat in the first place. Right? Because when you think it like when I think about the word defeat, I think about like war. I think about a battle and who is it that won, right? And who is it that lost? And there's a finality to the word defeat that I refuse to accept. certainly in our case, but I would say so for almost, we've spoken to so many thousands of people at this point, and I know that people sometimes feel defeated, but that is not an actual defeat. So that's one thing. So we can talk about setbacks, we can talk about challenges, we can talk about, learning opportunities, and it's not to try to come up with fluffy jargon to make soft or something that doesn't feel good, but it's about acknowledging that whatever has happened is not final. Right. That is not the end. And that's, I think, really important, that this is a bump, and this is something that we overcome. So when we talk about resilience and all sorts of things, that's why we talk about this. Okay. So that's the first thing. The other thing is this. Then a lot of times that feeling is very emotional. And so it's tying that to evidence of some kind. So one of the things that for example, in our case, one of the things that we know is that this thing works. This methodology works. We've done it. There are thousands of people out there with jobs. There are thousands of people out there who have reached great opportunities because of the value and what they unlocked within themselves through this product that we have, right? So,
and still with that,
and still with that,
feel
right?
defeat.
I know. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It mean one part is relying on the evidence. When you feel that way, is this a rational feeling? Is this a backed by data feeling? Right? And my argument is the vast majority of the times it is not. It's just a feeling. In the very rare cases when it's maybe that's not the direction, maybe that's not the impact that I thought, then we can talk about, well, then let's go back to the methodology. Let's retool. Where is it that things went wrong? And at the same time, that's still not a defeat, right? It is an indicator for a pivot of some kind. And that happens. There's nothing wrong with that. And then the other question is, then when we don't feel good about it, when we feel defeated, we ask ourselves a lot of negative what if questions. What if I was aiming too big? What if, as you said, what if this thing doesn't actually work? A big piece of that is flipping that on its head. A big part of the big universe, small universe concept is then taking that and saying, what if it's actually too small? What if it's actually so much more potentially transformational than I ever thought in the first place? And I know that's been our approach to this as well. We realized that, in fact, we were painting it too small.
Yeah, and that was actually limiting us, and
it was actually limiting us, and limiting us in particular in terms of having the whole message actually resonate with people. Right. So that idea, I think, is really important, that if you're going to play what if games with yourself, you need to flip them the other way too. What if this is actually bigger than I ever possibly imagined? What if this has the ability to impact people's lives way more than I ever thought possible? What does that look like? What is that path? And who do I need on my side to make that go forward? And what do I need to do? And as soon as you start doing that, you start to see that there's oftentimes that sort of next evolution. Not I think of like Pokemon characters, you know what I mean? They're amazing on their own, and then they evolve and you're like, whoa, what just happened? And that can happen to people, and that can happen to your ideas as well. And oftentimes that's the springboard that you need. That's the emotional release that you need. And oftentimes the psychological blockage that you've been putting on yourself that you need to let go of and actually see something much bigger.
Absolutely. Actually, I was thinking about it. We've been talking about it in terms of like the founder point of view, right? Ours, that even not putting in the big vision, that's what people are attracted to, right? It's one of the, we teach this and we still were blind to it, right? That you need to, people get on board with your ideas and your vision, even whether you're interviewing for a job. Like, I don't want to just be about this as like a founding thing, right? Anything. They are connected to that energy that you're emitting. And I feel like when you're in that big universe space, you're excited, right? When you're in that small universe space, you're like in the weeds. And that excitement and that whole thing about it, you don't feel it. And I think that's one of the things that was my biggest lesson, I think, in this defeat is I'm seeing is that the energy matters, right? When I was here talking in the weeds, I'm not giving that 100% evidence and belief, let's say what you were talking about, because I know that it's so much bigger and I'm shrinking it. But when I'm talking about it at the scale it needs to be, right? It's there, like the confidence, the excitement. Think about it when you're pitching an idea or like us in the tech, people gravitate to the wow. And the wow is not going to be there if you're not in that big universe space.
Yeah.
But I think like you were just talking about, it's that feedback. Then you get rejections, and you start to think, oh, it's because it was too big. So I like that reframing you did. It's not that it was too big. It's also a numbers game too, right? I think
For sure.
there's that too. I think reminding yourself too that like you were saying, the rejections are not about shrinkage. And I think one thing that helps always me reminding is, okay, in the job application world, the grant world, right? We use that 5%. Like you're going to get 5% acceptance, 95% rejections. So you have to apply to at least 100 to get 5, right? Like I think most people apply to 5 and they're like, I got rejected right now. But
Exactly.
even in the VC world or like us, like, the angel world, we're not going for VC, we're going for smaller capital. It's a lot even worse, I think. What were we reading? It's like 0.02, right? So
Yeah.
that means you got to knock on not the 100 in your job, 2,000 doors, and reminding yourself that it's that as well, and that to knock on big universe, it's like, what are those 2,000 doors? Maybe there's other doors you didn't even think about, other ways to knock. I think one of the coolest things that I discovered recently was like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? It's like
Yeah.
just reaching out to alumni of the university I graduated and just asking them for advice, right? Like, I think that was the one thing I was going to ask you, right? Like, one thing that's helped me is the advice of how do you expand your universe? And I don't know the universe of tech. So part of it is, okay, so how do I uncover that universe? And one of it was like, I think it was helpful for me was finding LinkedIn Sales Navigator and just asking alumni for advice, just so I can start understanding what that universe is like, right? Before I even go knocking on more doors.
Yeah.
So what would you say? What would be advice for folks that, remember, people can't see what they can't see. So how do they expand to big universe when they might be surrounded by small universe?
So one of the first things I would say, as soon as we're talking about concepts of universe, even from a philosophical point of view, the truth is then that there are infinite possibilities, right? There's a potentially infinite number of small universes that we haven't seen yet, right? So and just as you said, we can talk about the numbers game, right? It's a somewhere between 2% and 5%, even to get some interest and some feedback, right? So it's a rough place to be emotionally sometimes. But the truth is that even if we've talked to 200, 500, 1,000 people, we're still only scratching the surface of possibilities, right? So it's important to know that there's, no matter how much you think you've tried, there's always something a little bit more that's out there, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is how it is that you approach. And I think the approach matters a lot. And this is something that I have had to learn over the years, and I think that I'm definitely still perfecting it. But anybody who has watched our show for any period of time knows 100% that between you and me, I am not the extrovert in this, right? That the whole concept of reaching out to people and networking and breaking, like consciously, purposely, intentionally trying to break into a larger universe is not something that necessarily comes natural to me, especially not in this business, venture capital, angel investment kind of world, right? It's one of the reasons why I love to travel, because travel is definitely one of the things that for me has kept me constantly expanding what I feel like is my universe, right? But in terms of this particular vein, it's something that that has definitely not come natural to me, but it's gotten better realizing that, one, there's a tremendous commonality. There are other wavelengths through which you can connect to people other than this one thing that you're trying to push. So oftentimes, if you approach people with, look, this is what I have, and you got to see this, and this is the big universe, and all of that, that it's going to be a little bit off-putting, right? People are going to put up their barriers, and that a big piece of it is initially creating a kind of trust, a kind of connection that transcends that a little bit. So establishing that humanity is important. Second thing is realizing that it may be the case that this person, this little universe, came to you as much because you have something to offer it as it has something for you, right? So I think that one of the biggest things you can do is approach any opportunity that you seek out with humility and with a service-minded perspective. How is it, I am entering this little universe, and what is it that maybe I can provide to it here? So and I have to say it that way because I know that I struggle sometimes with the language of business, right? And the language of business and the language of sales in particular so often talks about, oh, you have to give value to your customers. You have to give value to your clients. And it feels, to me anyway, when you say that, feels very artificial and contrived sometimes. And that's hard for me if I need to do that. But the idea of service is something that's very natural to me. So when I come in with how can I serve here, that resonates with me. That feels natural. I'm here to make a connection with someone. Maybe this will be something that clicks for another purpose, maybe not, but that is definitely what I approach it with, So I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but that's my start.
Well, I think it answered that. Like if you don't know, reach out to someone, right? Be of service to them. Like I think that's one of the cool things I found on LinkedIn. It's called Sales Navigator, but I'm actually reaching out to everyone to ask them for advice. 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes. Don't ask for people more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes is a good amount of time to learn about their universe, which then expand your universe. I also made me think about the Celestine Prophecy too. I love that book and I love James.
Yes.
But he's all about expanding the universe too, because in the sense of talk to the person on the bus. I think what was really cool. So we just came back from a summer at Harvard where Paul was teaching, and we met this really cool guy. And actually, because one of our friends was visiting and then she met him, and it looks like we both work in human potential. But how cool is that she did she did the Celestine Prophecy, right? Like they both did. Like they both saw each other, they talked to each other, and then she had me talk to him. And it turns out we work on the same kind of cool things. And then it opened our universe into possibilities, and that led to other introductions, right? But I think about that a lot because even like when we talk about the world travel, right? I mean, I'm not just traveling to travel. Like I go to travel. I went to the Maldives, we were doing work, but I saw this guy and I knew he was a heart-led high achiever, and we immediately clicked and talked about all these things. And like you were saying, when we've tested this methodology, we've intentionally traveled and asked people this question everywhere to see if it resonates with people.
Yeah.
And it opens up our universe that it does, right? That we have a lot more commonalities than we think. And even though, we think about it differently, we think about the same type of things.
Yeah.
And
I love that you brought up the Celestine Prophecy, actually, because you and I talk a lot about the synchronicity aspect of it, right? But I'll tell you what's interesting. As soon as you were telling the story, I don't know if you remember, there's a part in the story where the protagonist of the story is being taught how to see the world in a different way, right? And in places where he sees and feels energy, when he is aligned with that, when he's sort of tapped into that, he literally sees colors differently, and he perceives the world in a different place and in a different way. And I thought it was really interesting because as I thought about the way you described that interaction with this friend who saw, that this person had potential and that we had so much in common with them. I think that in a lot of ways, that's what the book was talking about, right? This idea, this ability of the person who is aligned and tapped in to be able to see these connections, to be able to almost like match auras in some way to bring people together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And the more of us that do that and like actually stop and talk to people, that's how we connect the small universes together, right? To
Yeah.
tap into these larger, and now that we're such in a connected world, it's interesting because we're connected, but we're also disconnected, right? So the more that we can practice that actual deep connection, the more. So I was thinking also, we've talked a lot about on the tech and the business side, but I know that I definitely felt defeated at work too, many times. And it required the times when I wasn't defeated, when I shined, when I was in my big universe space.
Yeah.
It's when I stepped out of small universe and really showcased the value and service I brought in all dimensions and like brought in, like it was when in small universe, people will see me as an executor. But in big universe, they see me as the strategist, right? And the person who then connects all the dots and fundraises, all these things,
Yeah.
right? But when you're living in small universe and feeling defeated, you start to we see that also in interviews, right? You start to you talk about yourself in terms of your tasks.
Yeah.
You start talking about yourself in terms of your deliverables rather than the vision of change that you want to bring to this institution, to this team, or whatever it is, right? Or the growth, or maybe the team cohesion, whatever it is that your motivation is. What would you say about that? Because I think there are some people who are listening, and I know I could have listened. I would have really needed this conversation probably 10 years ago before I had I had tapped. Oh no, maybe 15 years ago. I have to go back and say, oh my God, yes, I would have needed this
Crap, how
15
old
years
am
ago.
I?
Crap, 10 years ago I was already enlightened. To 15. 15 when I wasn't. I would have needed this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say to people who are either students or working, like how do they tap? Is it similar? Is it the same concepts?
I think that the vast majority, I'm going to answer your question by going bigger first. Okay. I think that the vast majority of the problems, the strife in this world are caused by insufficient big universe thinking and too much focus on the small universe. I think that when we think about crime and poverty and corruption and racism and discrimination and all of that, I think that those are major examples of small universe thinking. So when we start to apply that down to our individual levels, it comes down to how is it that we see ourselves and how is it that we see our value and what we bring into this world, right? So if we're in a situation where I'm feeling small, where I'm feeling defeated, where I'm feeling like this is not where I belong, this is not, I could do more than this. And at the same time, we're still talking about ourselves, as you said, in terms of this is my task and this is my degree and this is the experience that I have and this is how many years I've been in this job, and using those very linear, very contained metrics in order to assess what we see as our value. That is going to be the small universe. That is the recipe for feeling stuck, for feeling that is the only place where you belong, and that's the only place where you have value. And so I know that we do this, but I can't do enough to help people understand that what you are, what you bring, your value is so much more transcendental than that. Not even just bigger, but transcendental. Each of us brings a unique problem-solving approach, a unique view on the world and how it is that we can make our world better that belongs to us. That is what we bring into this world that is beyond our titles, beyond our job experience, beyond what artificial intelligence can do. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's literally called artificial intelligence because it is artificial. It is made up intelligence that's distinct and contrasted with human intelligence, right? What is it that you bring? What you bring is that unique perspective, that unique problem-solving approach that cannot be emulated. And as soon as you start thinking about yourself in that way and speaking about yourself in that way, you will see how you will start to look for opportunities differently. The opportunities that come to you will feel and be more aligned to not just your experience, but how it is that you solve problems in this world. So you talked about, for example, how it is that the big universe and small universe concept comes into interviewing in particular, right? One of the things that we help so many people walk through that interview process. The more that you can talk about yourself in this unique problem-solving approach, the values and the value that you bring, what you will find is that you're going to start connecting in the interview with the person that is speaking to you on a different level. They're not just looking at your resume anymore. They're now seeing you as a unique individual, a unique person, and understanding how it is that what you bring matches with the problems that they need solved, right? So the more that you can do that, the more that you are naturally going to gravitate into larger concepts of the universe even, and not just stay in those small spaces where you've been told perhaps that that's where you belong.
And I'm going to put a plug for our app because that is exactly what our app does. That's what I was thinking about what you were saying. Like, it's, if anybody wants to go in yoursoul.app, you can give it a try.
Soul, S-O-L, right? Not S-O-U-L.
Yeah, S-O-L, sorry.
Your S-O-L.
Yeah. It's because that's what we're doing. Because some people are like, well, I don't know what it is that I bring. That was our whole point in creating that. And like when you were talking about AI, we use AI to condense what we do manually, right? But that's what AI is for. So like, I think like that's the shift also, is rather than the narrative around AI replacing our jobs and us, think about it as AI amplifying your own power. So we're using AI to amplify our power, like in that methodology, but also your power, because then you get to, by using it, expand your universe, right? And so, but AI is just helping you unpack that and doing what we do at scale, but it's not replacing. And I think that's how people need to see it, right? Because that fear, and that was your kind of like leaning into that as we're talking, that fear of AI comes from when you're stuck in small universe because you're being like, oh, it can replace me. But the truth is, it's not. It's not, because we have our own way of solving problems and our unique value that's only ours. And that's, AI can learn, right? It learns the mean of everyone that comes together, and that's why it's the mean. It's the average of all the way that people think, and comes up with a homogeneous way to do that. But it's never going to replace how we are. But actually, to see it as an opportunity. Guess what? I can bring there's going to be new spaces, or how can AI amplify what I bring to the table, which I think is pretty cool at work or in a company or whatever it is that you're doing. Anyways, I just got excited about this. Now I'm like back in big universe going, no, our stuff is cool, man. Like, no more defeat.
So the AI discussion is really interesting, right? Because it's just a tool, right? So economics, so going back to economics, one of the things that economics tells us is, and the way that economics has historically been constructed as a discipline, and therefore how it's been applied in the world. One of the scary things about being an economist is realizing how many people listen to economists. It's a little scary sometimes, But one of the things that has been the major construct of economics is that basically there's this concept of production, of productivity, and that it is basically the sum of human effort, human capital, physical capital, and then different kinds of things like technology. And we sometimes separate the human physical potential for labor and then augment it with human capital, which is our education and the skills that we have and all that. And so we combine all of that in some formulaic way. And that's how that's how we know about how much we can produce in any particular given scenario, right? And so in that sense, AI becomes just another efficiency tool. That's all it is. It's just something that, as I think about that production function, that curve, it's something that pivots up my function a little bit so that with the same amount of human effort that I put into it, I can get a little more output out of it, right? And depending on what your field is and what it is that you're doing, that difference, that sigma is going to be a little bit different in some, right? But at the end of the day, that's kind of all it is, right? And so when people start to freak out about AI and, that's going to take over the world and all of that, I still think I go back to, if that's where you are, that's still small universe, right? So what is bigger universe? Bigger universe is that in that efficiency, it's giving us a little bit of time that we didn't have before. What do I do with that time? I can spend that time seeking out connections, seeking out alignment. And so I personally think that there is a kind of capital in production that we have never spoken about. And I call it alignment capital. So the traditional economic model assumes that you and I and the machines and the technology are largely replaceable. We are largely homogeneous units that can be plug and played, right? But what nothing accounts for is the alignment between you and I. So how is it that two people who come together and are forced to work together, but don't necessarily have complementary values or complementary skills or complementary problem-solving approaches, how is it that they are going to advance versus bringing together two people very intentionally? Because they have commonality in values, because they have complementarity in the problem-solving approaches they bring, and how much more productive are those going to be than this other forced, unnatural pairing, right? So when we start to think about, what if I used my time that AI has given back to me to try to forge better connections, to try to forge greater alignment, and through that, not just pivot my production function, but really come to a kind of productivity and innovation and disruption that could never have been possible before. Right. So I think I took a tangent off of what you were saying, but I think that whole AI discussion is really one that, again, we look at it small universe and negative. And what if it's the other way? What if it actually is giving us a potential that's so much bigger than we ever thought possible?
And also, like, I think the environmental, I'm an environmental scientist, right? So like by training, but I think even those conversations about the data centers and everything, I think they're also doing small universe thinking, not the environmentalists. I'm thinking about the people who put the big data centers, because like you'll see in other countries, they're being super creative. They're putting data centers underneath the ground that need heat, and those are providing heat to the places that are cold, right? And creating a whole recycling system that is not contributing to environmental dangers. Or we've seen it in the Middle East, where you can create, right? The technology is in advance without hurting the environment. But the reason why it is here or, other places is because they're thinking in small universe, just like, well, let's just put it in there without thinking about creative ways, right? Bigger picture things and how we can create this in a sustainable way, especially places that are cold.
Yeah.
Especially places like this where it can be recycled and reduce like the amount we're spending on heat. But that's a whole other discussion. But I even think with that, because I know there's, discussions around AI in that regard. I also think it's humans being lazy, right? Like that's what it comes down to.
So it's super interesting, right? So,
but I don't want to go on that tangent.
It's actually not a tangent. It's not a tangent at all. Actually, it's not a tangent at all because, for example, again, economics. One of the things we talk about really often, it's in any introduction to microeconomics textbook, is this idea of externalities, right? And the externalities are a big part, for example, of what environmental science is built on, right? This idea that the market doesn't account for all of the costs or benefits, but doesn't account for all of the impacts of what is happening in any particular situation. As soon as you have that situation where you're not accounting for everything that is taking place, what's happening? It means that you're focusing on only a small universe. You're not looking at the big universe, right? And so when we talk about in practice, you and I work a lot in terms of systems and systems thinking and all of that. As soon as you bring
Which
in
comes
those
from that field, because
exactly.
I mean, and that's why when people ask, like, oh, how is what you're doing connected to the past? It's super connected because all of that is the systems thinking,
Exactly.
right? And then what I got frustrated is we have to work now, I think, like, unless each human understands their potential and, like in your case, can move to big universe, we're not going to move the needle on these things.
I
And
think
that's
that's
why we
right.
do what we do. But yeah, you were saying, sorry.
No. But it's just that. It's just pointing out that in fact, all of that comes down to an application of small universe thinking
Exactly.
that would be improved by big universe.
And that's
Yep.
why you have to work, and that's what we're doing is helping people from small universe expand to big universe, because then it will impact in a positive way economics. It will
Right.
impact in a positive way the environment. It will impact people in a positive individual way. We actually have gone bigger than our training of our individual subjects
Yeah.
to understand that you have to connect at this bigger thing to have an impact at the smaller thing, right? So when people ask me, why aren't you working on this thing? I'm like, I am, but at the big universe scale,
Right.
not the small universe.
That's right.
But anyways, I feel like I'm going to circle back to the conversation. I know we're 45 minutes in, that I feel now super energized, way less defeated than when I started this conversation. I feel now this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, why we're working on the things that we're working on. And that you have to stay in big universe, right? And so I'm hoping anyone else listening to this, whatever situation that you were going through, that you felt defeated in, like, yeah, for us, it was this app. And I feel like I've come out at the end of the conversation more energized. Maybe in your case, it's anything. It could be at job. Maybe it's even with your family or anything. I hope you came out of this that it's don't shrink into small universe. Don't see that as the only data point. You have been through defeat in the past, and think about how you've then overcome that and what it's led to. I mean, that's what I do too. Like when you're talking about data, Paul, I thought about other times in my life where I didn't know if this was going to work, and it worked, right? Keeping true to it and staying in big universe. So I hope that everyone, this was exactly, if you felt defeated, just what you needed. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
So here we go. Paving my own way. Seeing light even on the darkest of days. I trust myself and know my worth. There is nothing but stars behind me. So can we go higher? Can we go higher? Together we're better to dream bigger and louder. Can we go higher? Can we go higher? Can we go higher? Together we're better to dream bigger and louder. Can we go higher?